Hey, welcome to 23 Degrees Sideways. I was going to do this video outside this morning, but then last night the clear air of the valley and a little bit of wind hit and, all of a sudden, boom, back into the high 20s. So it's actually pretty freaking cold outside. Let's talk about murder. Let's talk about homicide rates. In the late 1700s, in the United States, the homicide rate was, based on an estimate, 30 per 100,000. That's pretty bad. Just for reference, that's, failed state bad, okay? It's a frontier situation, and there's a lot of factors that go into that. And we're going to talk about that a little bit as we move forward. Sometime in the 19th century, early 19th century, we did, early mid, it dropped to 20. And after the Civil War, it dropped to 10. 10 homicides per 100,000. We're doing really good at this point. And then it drops to something like 1.3, 1.4, maybe as high as 1.8. There's problems with data collection by 1900. So by the turn of the 20th century, we were doing better as a free yeomanry, armed, gun-toting, everyone owned guns society than Europe is doing now. I'm putting some emphasis on the gun thing right now because that's the topic of homicide. People don't discuss homicide in terms of homicide. They discuss homicide in terms of guns. It's a very odd thing, and it has to do with a religious mindset. And I really do feel that most of the progressives, most of the media programming, and most of the Democratic Party propaganda, I guess, whatever you want to call it, is engineered around making talismans out of guns. The gun control debate is no longer necessarily about armed freedom versus unarmed slavery, although unarmed slavery is the direct end result of removing armaments from your populace. This is a historical fact. There's no exceptions to this after enough time. But that's not really what the debate is anymore, because the debate is about talismans. It's about evil symbology from the left and from progressives, which is very interesting because at 1904, the murder rate in the U.S. starts to climb, okay? And it climbs all the way back up 11, 12 at one point at the end of Carter's term. But it climbs up. Very early in the 20th century, it spikes up above 8, hits 10, okay? 10 homicides per 100,000 people again. Really bad. And this coincides, and there's peaks and valleys. It's very dramatic increases and decreases over the entirety of the 20th century and into the 21st century. And, it'll go from 11 to 4, 3.8, and back and forth. There's a lot of that. And you can actually watch those spikes and time them with certain types of political, social, and economic events. It's really interesting to tie it all together. So we'll come back to that in a moment. 30, okay? 1600s, 1700s, your homicide rate is 30 per 100,000. There's a reason it's so high, and that is high, okay? That, there's just, how do you describe it? That's 3 per 10,000. That means, so a small town, okay? A suburb, right? 50,000 people is going to see a dozen murders every year. And that's a lot. That's huge. We talk about hitting 20 murders in Chicago by March as if like, oh my God, but that's nothing. You know, when you're talking about millions of people and your rate is 30 per 100,000, that's a lot, okay? A small town, this where I'm parked right now is a small town. It's a town of 8,000 people plus some transients, call it 10,000. You're talking about 3 homicides per year, every year. That's a lot, okay? You know, we have one every couple of years. That's not accidental deaths. That's actual homicides. That's a huge deal, okay? That's a lot of deaths. And the reason is, I'm going to use some terms loosely here again like I did in the previous video. The reason is for scarcity or unlivingness or insecurity. There's a lot of need and want going on. Okay, people will kill for food when there's not enough food. And it's not that, you know, the U.S. has never had a real famine. And it's never that we've never had enough food. But on an individual level, on a societal level, food scarcity is one of those things. You know, security of being able to just like own stuff, have stuff, go to sleep. Robbery, highway robbery. Highway robbery was a big deal for a long time. This is one of those things that the libertarian extremists, I guess, the there will be no public lands and no public roads, people tend to kind of ignore, is how bad a problem robbery and homicide on highways actually is in an completely unregulated environment. But that's a different topic. We'll have that discussion later. 30. Okay, and it's a hard scrabble frontier society, and this is just, these things do happen. As we develop a core of several factors, one is social cohesion. As we become a nation, as we become a people, as we develop our society, and as we develop our societal trust, so if you're hungry, you don't kill someone, you just say, hey, you know, I'm a little short on food this month, and we have communities and societies and churches and social trust. As stuff comes together, a lot of the want, the need, actually disappears, and your murder rate goes down, your homicide rate goes down. Society, a strong, high-trust society drops your murder rate dramatically, okay? And that's one of the reasons you'll see that the homicide rate in the U.S. is so heavily localized now, is that you have areas of our country with high trust and areas of our country with low trust and so on. 30 to 20 to 10 to under 2. That's just a dramatic change. And it's a change that is not explained by the presence or absence of an evil talisman. It's not that everyone had guns so everyone was scared to commit homicide. No. That's not why we have guns, to make other people scared. You know, that's another one of those leftist talking points, but it's one that some conservatives have adopted. You know, a talisman against fear. In fact, realistically, guns have nothing to do with this at all. It's not that gun ownership has little to do with homicide rates. It's that gun ownership has nothing to do with homicide rates. Okay? People like to point out the mass shootings, the extreme mass shootings that are reported periodically, and point at those as examples of what gun control could prevent. Can't prevent the majority of homicides, but a couple thousand per year, right? No, because we've had mass homicides with knives, with arson, with bombs, with axes, with... It's firearms don't actually make it easier. They do, however, play into a media propaganda game. The media will not report on other problems because homicide is not the topic. Guns are the topic. And that's something we need to change. We need to talk about homicide. Why is the murder rate, the homicide rate in the United States in the 1790s 30 per 100,000? Why does it drop to under 2 at 1900? Why does it go back up during the Progressive Era and never come down all the way? These are questions you have to ask. And no one can ask these questions of a progressive because too many of the answers tie into progressive policy. You know, remember, progressives are all about planned society, changing the nature of humans, okay? Utilitarianism, more government, more mandates, more control over people's lives, less freedom. They talk about equity, but that's a shifting goalpost too, because you know, we used to talk about the potential for starvation. Now we talk about the potential for food insecurity. We now have a national emergency on food and poverty because people have literally a potential for food insecurity. You are so far removed from starvation at that point that you're making shit up, okay? It's not... You live in food insecurity. You're not sure if you can shop the last 3 days of the month, which I'm going to tell you is it's not that big a deal, you know. We're not talking about people who eat once a week unintentionally. There are people who do that intentionally, and that's fine. We're talking about people who might have to hit the ramen drawer in the pantry a couple days out of the month because... honestly, poor planning. The money's there, okay? The money's there. I'm not saying poverty doesn't exist. I'm not saying poverty isn't ugly and horrible and bad for your cortisol levels. But generally speaking, if the priorities are right and if media allows you to have the right priorities, the money's there for food. So we now talk about having a potential, like there's a possibility that you could be put in a situation where you could have to worry about your grocery budget for the last 3 days of the month. Maybe. That's where our emergency is now. They take it, there has to be an emergency, there has to be stress, there has to be life stress, there has to be a reason to commit homicide. This is the thing that the progressives don't seem to understand because they keep thinking that they're going to engineer humanity to not be human. Is that if you give people life stresses, people are going to respond to those life stresses. And if you try to push everything as a life or death issue, you're going to get murders. Okay, so 1904, and I'm going to beat up on Teddy here a little bit because as wonderful as Teddy Roosevelt was in terms of certain aspects of foreign policy, as much as I like the public lands system, the idea, and Teddy did it wrong. He did it badly. He did it poorly. This is a case where poorly is better than none, I guess. But that goes back to Thomas Jefferson and the Louisiana Purchase. Roosevelt was a progressive. And while the bull moose progressivism was different from the ardent socialist, globalist authoritarian progressivism of now, they are very closely related, and many of the ways that they are related is in how they treat common man, common humanity. And that's I'm trying to do this without getting too aggressive against the idea of progressives, because someone needs to listen to this video and take away something beyond he hates progressives. I really hate progressivism, okay? I really do. I spent a long time researching it because, it's a very big conflict for me because Teddy Roosevelt was always a childhood hero, and he's one of the prime drivers for quadrupling the homicide rate in the United States in the first decade of the 20th century. There. How about that, right? But anyway, it's not guns. You have to look at the factors that go into this. What drives the decline of homicide is what Buckminster Fuller called livingry. And I'm going to take and expand his meaning a little bit, but all those things that make life into something more worth living, more happy, more stable, more secure, less chronically stressful. Stress is good. Chronic stress is bad. Chronic stress is when the company store owns your soul. You can't get out of debt. You can't quit your job. Chronic stress is when you can't quit a job ever because all the debt, all the expectations. Chronic stress is when you don't know how to procure your own food should you not have a little green ticket on you, okay? These things here, these biosurvival tickets, the importance of these is one of the things that drives homicide, okay? That's a biosurvival ticket. That's Robert Anton Wilson, I think, was the one who coined the phrase biosurvival ticket for those. Might have been Chris Hyatt, I don't know. Somewhere in that group of people. Stress, chronic stress, is a driver of homicide. And reducing that chronic stress is a really big deal. And that reduction of stress, the increase of survivability, of plenty, whatever, that drives, and it's social. It's not just food, okay? Just remember, it's at least as important that we're talking about social factors. Society building, coming together, an open but secure and trusting society. All this stuff goes together and creates a low homicide environment. Homicides drop dramatically, unbelievably. People don't understand exactly how big a deal it is to go from 30 to less than 2 per 100,000 for a homicide rate in a little over a century. It's a fundamental shift. It's the biggest proof of the yeomanry phase, the expansionist, citizen-based expansionist phase of the United States, the American experiment. Probably the biggest marker of success that you can just point to and look at is the homicide rate, the sheer drop in homicide rate. Standards of living, survivability, life expectancy, child mortality. There's a whole bunch of stuff that goes in there with that. But this is like they all go together in their increases in quality. But the homicide rate is just this huge one that you can just show people and say, look at that. Then it goes back up. Why does it go back up? If you actually care, okay, the gun conversation is not the conversation you want to have. If you actually care about this, homicide rate, suicide rate, violent crime rate, if you actually care, you need to figure out why it goes up and why it goes down, and guns are not the answer. They are not even a relevant topic. The fact that it is a primary, one of the 3 or 4 top primary topics in American politics, literally proves that they don't care about homicide. So take that, shove it in your hat, and go about your day. Stay sideways.